What's up, everybody? In today's video, we continue our review of the Cold War, an era of political tension, espionage, and nuclear brinkmanship. In today's video, we're going to focus on the key policies and events that shaped the decades of the 1950s and 60s. Let's get started. In the aftermath of World War II, President Truman introduced the Truman Doctrine, which pledged to provide economic and military aid to countries threatened by communism. One of the first applications of this doctrine was Truman's decision to aid Greece and Turkey, which were under threat from communist insurgents. This marked the beginning of the policy of containment, aimed at preventing the spread of communism beyond its existing borders. The Truman Doctrine set the stage for a series of interventions and conflicts as the United States sought to uphold its commitment to containing communism. The Cold War was not just about politics. It was also played out on the battlefield. The Korean War, often referred to as the Forgotten War, was a pivotal conflict of the Cold War era that erupted in 1950. It was a deadly clash between the communist forces of North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union, and the United Nations forces, predominantly led by the United States. The war was sparked by North Korea's invasion of South Korea, aiming to reunify the peninsula under one communist flag. The United Nations, in response, intervened to defend South Korea and uphold the principles of democracy and containment of communism. The Korean War was marked by intense fighting, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. It was a brutal conflict that saw significant advances and retreats along the front lines, as well as numerous battles and skirmishes. The Korean War was also characterized by its devastating human toll, with millions of soldiers and civilians killed, wounded, or displaced. It was a war that tested the resolve and endurance of all involved, leaving scars that would linger for generations. After 3 years of fighting, an armistice agreement was signed in 1953, effectively ending the active hostilities and establishing a demilitarized zone along the 38th parallel, which still remains today. The Korean War may have faded from the memory for many, but its impact continues to resonate. It shaped the geopolitical landscape of East Asia, leading to the division of Korea into North and South, and setting the stage for decades of tension and confrontation between the two Koreas. One of the defining moments of the Cold War was the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. This ill-fated operation was authorized by President John F. Kennedy and aimed to overthrow the Cuban government led by Fidel Castro, a staunch ally of the Soviet Union. The invasion was carried out by a group of Cuban exiles trained and supported by the CIA. The plan was to spark a popular uprising against Castro's regime, but that did not go according to plan. The invasion quickly turned into a disaster as Cuban forces easily repelled the invaders. The failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion was a major embarrassment for the Kennedy administration and damaged America's credibility on the world stage. The Bay of Pigs invasion not only failed to achieve its objective of overthrowing Castro, but it also pushed him further into the arms of the Soviet Union, ultimately leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis the following year. In October 1962, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union that led many people in the world to believe that World War III was on the horizon. The crisis was triggered by the discovery of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. These missiles posed an immediate threat to the security of the United States, and tensions quickly escalated as both superpowers engaged in high-stakes games of brinkmanship. President John F. Kennedy faced the gravest crisis of his presidency, even worse than the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he responded with a combination of firmness and diplomacy. He ordered a naval blockade of Cuba to prevent further Soviet shipments of missiles and demanded the immediate removal of the missiles already in place. The world held its collective breath as the two superpowers stood on the brink of war. For 13 agonizing days, the fate of humanity hung in the balance as diplomats and military leaders grappled with the terrifying prospect of nuclear conflict. Eventually, through a series of secret negotiations, a deal was reached. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba in exchange for a pledge from the United States to remove its missiles from Turkey and to promise that they would not invade Cuba again. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a harrowing reminder of the dangers of nuclear weapons and the precariousness of the Cold War balance of power. Thanks to the cool-headed leadership of John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we avoided essentially World War III. But the fear and the realities of nuclear annihilation loom large over the world for the next several decades. Despite the tensions and conflicts of the Cold War era, it also gave rise to remarkable achievements. The nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union dominated much of the period as both superpowers sought to outdo each other in the development of increasingly powerful nuclear weapons. In 1957, the Soviet Union stunned the world with the launch of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. This event triggered the space race as the United States raced to catch up and assert its dominance in space exploration. And in the 1960s, the United States achieved a monumental victory in the space race by landing a man on the moon. Neil Armstrong's historic moonwalk in 1969 was not just a scientific achievement, but also a symbolic victory for democracy over communism. But we can't talk about the Cold War in the 1960s without talking about the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, one of the most controversial conflicts of the 20th century, was a prolonged and bloody struggle that lasted from 1955 to 1975. It was fought between the Communist government of North Vietnam, supported by its allies, and the government of South Vietnam, backed by the United States and other anti-communist nations. The roots of the Vietnam War can be traced back to the post-World War II era when Vietnam was divided into two separate entities, the communist-controlled North Vietnam and the anti-communist South Vietnam. The conflict was driven by ideological, political, and strategic factors as both sides sought to unify the country under their respective ideologies. The Vietnam War was characterized by its brutal guerrilla warfare, with both sides engaging in ambushes, bombings, and other tactics aimed at gaining control of territory and undermining the enemy's resolve. The conflict also saw the extensive use of chemical weapons such as Agent Orange, which had a devastating long-term effect on both soldiers and civilians. The Vietnam War was not only a military conflict, it was a polarizing and divisive issue throughout the United States and across the world. It sparked widespread protest and demonstrations as millions of people took to the streets to demand an end to the war and the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. The anti-war movement grew in strength and influence throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, fueled by growing public disillusionment with the war's human cost and its perceived lack of progress. The conflict deeply divided American society and tested the limits of public support for military intervention abroad. The Vietnam War ultimately ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon and the reunification of Vietnam under one communist flag. It was a bitter and costly affair for the United States, with over 58,000 American soldiers killed and hundreds of thousands more wounded or traumatized by their experiences. The Vietnam War left a profound and lasting impact on all those who lived through it. It reshaped American foreign policy, fueled debates over military interventionism, and raised questions about the morality and efficacy of war as a means of achieving political objectives. That's all the time we have for today. If you liked the video, click below. Also, subscribe to our channel. And if you know someone who would benefit from this video, someone who's getting ready to take their end of the year test, please share this with them so that we can help as many people as we possibly can. We'll see you next time.